Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Arthur Polyakov. I am the Managing Director of Advantex, which is organizing the MINEX conference for 15 years. This is the first time we are in Sofia, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this sunny day. The forum is being supported, and we're very grateful to SRK Consulting, ERM, Geotechmin, Elat the Department for International Trade, Dundee Precious Metals, and Bulgaria Alpha, which is also known in Bulgaria as Mundura Capital. MINEX Europe Annual Forum Series have been incepted in 2015 to create awareness of mining opportunities across the European continent. The forum helps to connect mining professionals, investors, academics, NGOs, and politicians with a view of stimulating practical discussions centered on sustainability, safety, and efficiency of mining. A new industrial revolution is brewing in Europe, which has recently committed to accelerating the transition from fossil fuels into renewable energy. Mining industry is expected to play a central role in redeveloping the continent's main industries, while also embracing an entirely new approach to resource extractions centered on people and green technologies. The automotive sectors would need greater supplies of lithium, nickel, copper, and rare earths as car makers move away from the internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. The increasing demand for cheaper and cleaner energy in the foreseeable future will rely on nuclear power generation and construction of metal-intensive power distribution and accumulation infrastructure facilities. Growing urbanization requires more metals and industrial materials. Technologies which convert renewable energy, like wind, solar, or geothermal energy, into a usable and transferable form, such as electricity, also require significant amount of metals and minerals. If Europe wants to maintain its sovereignty and ensure economic growth, then it will have to ensure a continued supply of mineral raw materials by developing mining operations closer to home. Some European states are already approving exploration plans and allowing companies to reopen idle mines or open the new mine sites. Other countries move into the open directions by discouraging investors and revoking mining concessions. Social license to operate remains the #1 risk factor in many European countries. Not in my backyard mentality presents the greatest challenge to companies developing mines in Europe and dangerously undermines the core foundation of future economic growth in the Balkans region and wider Europe. When defining economic priorities, governments should not ignore the fact that the welfare and economic prosperity are determined by consumption of raw materials. The richer the country, the more metals and materials it needs for building roads, houses, schools, hospitals, electric cars, and mobile phones. If the Balkan states want to secure long-term economic independence and prosperity, the development of mining industry should be given a central role in the government policies. This year, MINEX Forum is organized with the view of enhancing global awareness of potential discoveries of world-class metal deposits in the Western Tethys metallogenic belt. While the region's mining potential has yet to be determined, there's a significant number of mines that could be financially viable with the new methods. While the emergence of smart technologies, economic development in smaller mines is also becoming a reality. So during the 2 days and 10 sessions of the forum, over 50 experts will share practical knowledge of developing sustainable, efficient, and responsible mining in Europe and also globally. You'll hear about existing cases or exciting cases of transforming derelict mine sites into the state-of-the-art mining operations. You will meet with the international mining financiers and hear their views on opportunities of financing exploration projects in Eastern Central Europe and in the Balkan region. Thanks to the UK Department for International Trade, which is hosting Drinks Reception tonight at the Sofia History Museum, you will be able to network and meet each other and learn from each other, and also hear about the Bulgaria and Sofia's millennium-rich history. On the third day of the forum, some of you will visit the copper mine complexes developed by Geotechmin and Azrael Medad. So, on behalf of the MINEX Secretariat and MINEX Organizing Committee, I would like to express sincere gratitude to all sponsors and partners who have supported the event. We hope that MINEX Europe Forum will make a positive contribution to the discussions on mining industry development and its contribution to building carbon-free economy in the Balkans and wider Europe. So we wish you all participants a success, and welcome you again to the 4th Mining Aspiration Forum, MINEX Europe in Sofia. Thank you. Thank you. Now, and as promised, welcome to the 21st century as well. So I would like to ask you to take your mobile phones and to take part in the first keynote address discussion survey session. So my colleague Natalia will take a lead.
Thank you, Arthur. Okay, so please enter your mobile application on the phones, and you have to select Session Survey. And so we start with the first keynote session, survey, and question number 1. What is the top outcome that makes a mine sustainable? And several answers. Local and economic benefits, environmental responsibility, contribution to GDP, safety and security, the regeneration mine post-closure, other. So please select answers. And after that, you have to scroll down the page and select question list to move to the question number 2. What one thing results in some stakeholders objecting to new mine projects? Noise and air pollution, effects on water supply and pollution, influx on non-local workers, traffic volume, lack of consultation, safety concerns, other. The same thing here, we have to select one variant and then scroll down and push question list to move to the question number 3. And the third one is, what would be the single most effective at improving the public's perception of mining? Raise awareness of mining's contribution to low carbon economy, offer the public the opportunity to input to the mine design, demonstrate that impacts to humans and the environment are properly managed, demonstrate that mines create opportunities for local people during construction and operation, plan more effectively to develop the local economy so that it continues to prosper after the mine closes. Voted? Okay, done. Thank you, Arthur.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So I hope by the second day you will actually get a hand of answering those questions. We still actually have 9 sessions to go through. If you haven't downloaded the app, please do so. And I would like to introduce now you to our moderator for the first session. His name is Geraint Bowden. He's a senior partner with ERM. So Geraint will be moderating this session, and also he will be speaking last. I suggest taking questions after you've heard all the presentations, if time allows. If you want to ask questions, please raise your hand. We'll come to you with the microphone. If you want to ask questions via app, please do so, and I would encourage the moderator and speakers actually to check their apps on a regular basis in case they have any questions. Geraint, over to you.
Thank you, Arthur. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Thanks to all our sponsors, to our speakers, and especially to Arthur and his team for organising the 4th MINEX Europe conference. It's been a pleasure to be a part of all 4. Every year the conference gets stronger with greater numbers and an increasing diversity of speakers. So thank you, Arthur. You've done a wonderful job again, and I promise to get used to the technology by next year. Keynote session 1 is titled Sustainability and the Macro Picture for the European Mining Sector. We have 5 speakers I'm afraid I am one. We should have time for questions, because if we're running late, I'll cut mine a little bit short. We already have a change of speaker. So our first speaker, Professor Nikolai Volkanov, unfortunately has been called away at short notice, but Dr. Ivan Mitev has very kindly agreed to step in at short notice. I believe the title of your presentation is still going to be the Mineral Raw Materials Industry in Bulgaria, Strategic Benefits and Sustainable Development. Welcome. Ivan, over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in Southern Bulgaria on MINEX Forum. For me, it's a pleasure to present you Bulgarian Chamber of Mining and Geology and the mineral raw materials industry in Bulgaria, and strategy benefits and sustainable development. Now I will present on Bulgarian.
The Bulgarian Chamber of Mining and Geology is a nationally representative organization. It's a nationally representative organization founded in 1991. This is one of the first professional associations in the territory of Bulgaria, and its main objective is to defend, protect the business in the area of mining and processing of mineral raw materials. The mission of our interest is to protect the members in accordance with the principles of market economy, sustainable development, and ethical standards. We also aim to ensure the development. The vision of our organization is a long-term development of a national association of employers with a sustainable contribution to improving the business environment and ensure the socio-economic prosperity of Bulgaria. Our members are already 118 since last Thursday. They work towards this sustainable development of our industry, and they are divided in several sectors. On this pie chart, you can see the subsectors in which our members operate, including extraction of oil and gas companies involved in geological service and prospecting of materials, lining materials, aggregates, building materials, industrial materials are our new area which we are developing in our country. Research and engineering are a must for sustainable development. Mining, construction, and also trading in all these goods are part of the main activities covered by the development of the business environment in Bulgaria. The activities which our organization engages in order to protect our members, it is promoting standards for sustainable development of the extractive industry. Second, we aim at clear and legislative initiatives aimed at protecting the interests of the members and companies in the extractive industry. Branch collective agreement which protects the rights of employees in our industry. This is a document which we are very proud of, because this is one of the first branch collective agreement in with employers. The branch information system, we are aiming to develop a shared database which reflects the state of the industry in Bulgaria. This database is intended to support our members from the stage of prospecting and the exploration up to the marketing of their products on the global markets. All this we put together in our annual newsletter, where we summarize the trends in the market and describe the growth of mining in Bulgaria. In our newsletter magazine, you can find information about good practices in technological and social terms. Part of our we also organize a European Mining Business Forum. Every day we celebrate the National Miners' Day. By tradition, this is the feast of Saint Ivan of Rila, 17th of August. Then on that day, all stakeholders in the mining businesses, including researchers and scientific organizations, we celebrate this important day for us. The European Day of Minerals is also organized and supported by our organization. This is another part of our initiatives. Our national strategy for the development of the mining industry is based on a few fundamental principles, starting from the use of own resources, human capital, investments in human capital, the raw materials which are available in the territory of Bulgaria, and know-how which we develop in collaboration with academic institutions and are implemented in production. The resource independence of Bulgaria is another part of our national strategy. Employment, tax revenues, fees, export growth are all elements which contribute to the development of the extractive industry and to raising the incomes of the general population. Attraction of foreign investment, undoubtedly technology and site development requires major financial resources, and in this area we work successfully with international investors. Follow-up investments in products of higher added value. The objective of our work is to attract industries which use our natural resources here locally in order to reduce the amount of export. The finished product should be produced in Bulgaria. Innovation and education are certainly an important part, although they come last in the presentations, but without them our extractive industry will be in a very difficult position. What are the indicators? The key indicators of the Bulgarian extractive industry, according to the National Statistical Institute, this industry accounts for about 5% of the GDP directly, and up to 10 indirectly, 23,000 directly employed in the industry, and 120,000 employed in related industries. And the production of raw materials. Unlike most industry in Bulgaria, the extractive industry is a leader in terms of labor productivity, which is 2.5 times higher than the average level for Bulgaria. We can also boast quite a high level of wages of employees. In the regions where the regions which produce raw materials are leading per wages per capita in Bulgaria. This is according to the official statistics of the government. 2.8 billion euro is the export of mineral raw materials by Bulgarian companies, and the production of coal and the production of electricity account for 40% of Bulgaria's energy mix. So further statistics, 448 established deposits of underground resources, 96 valid prospecting and exploration permissions, 531 concessions, including all subsectors, starting from coal and reaching to aggregates, sand and gravel. 0.9% of Bulgaria's territory is subject to concession against an EU average of 1%. 109 million tons in the yield in the past year 2008. The chart presents the distribution. 31% is metal ores. These are non-ferrous metals, copper, zinc, lead. Industrial materials also account for 12% of the total yield. Oil and gas production, we are still trying. Coal mining is well represented in the Maritsa coal basin, where we mine those 32%, and extraction of building materials, sand and gravel for the building industry. 1.4 billion. And now, in financial terms, the value of the production is 1.4 billion. Metal ores have the lion's share of 53%, followed by coal mining, non-metallic minerals, and auxiliary activities. What about investments? 160 million euros per year. As I mentioned already, innovation, new technology and modern equipment are the fundament on which in which our companies invest. And second but not least, our companies invest in environment protection projects. Bulgaria especially can provide examples, but the spending on environment is a priority, and this spending starts before the investment projects for extraction of raw materials begin. So this environmental spending starts before extraction and ends much after the closure of the mine. So our environmental efforts come ahead of production. Professional qualification, health and safety of employees in our industry are important, or perhaps a fundamental pillar in the portfolio of each company. Each company aims to achieve a 0% accident range and to reduce accidents. The competition every year goes. Our chamber has established a special award which is given every year to companies that have achieved the longest period of 0 accidents. corporate social responsibility initiatives in the areas of mining is also a leading aspect and it can serve as an example for a number of countries. They witness our social initiatives. Each municipality, our mining companies invest in educational infrastructure, health infrastructure, supporting local businesses. They also take responsibility for healthcare. This is another major focus of our mining companies. What are the risks? The risks include purely geological risks. They are well known. Stock exchange prices, the decrease of prices in the past year. Also Natura is one of the major risks. Why? Because 34% of Bulgaria's territory is covered by the Natura network, against an EU average of 25-27%. The potential more than 60 types of raw materials in proven stocks that are not developed, higher exports 3.4 times by natural, by volume 7.5 times by value. Professionals, engineers are trained at the University of Mining and Geology. Very well developed industrial branches such as metallurgy and machine building. They use our product and innovation and technology. I saw in the agenda that Bulgarian companies will introduce state-of-art innovations in our production. Law compliance, transparency, and publicity are part of the activities of each company. These activities are outsourced to external companies. Concession fees are about EU averages, and in our chamber we every year improve the legislative network. Investments and innovations, application of standards, collaboration of stakeholders is an ongoing process, as well as corporate social responsibility. There are numerous benefits from this industry, including financial, cultural, social, risk management, partnership, and employment. The potential, there is requirement for using the potential of member states in the EU, development of non-traditional resources, rapid development of production technology, combating employment and promoting green technology, balanced economic and environmentally responsible approach, efficient collection and recycling of waste, conservation and recovery and mining waste, and adequate and effective regulatory framework. This is our vision for supporting the business in Bulgaria. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ivan, and thank you for stepping in at such short notice. My pleasure now to introduce Dr. Marcin Sadowski. Marcin is head of the raw materials sector at the Executive Agency for Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises, ESME, of the European Commission. He's responsible for the research and innovation projects of Horizon 2020 concerned with raw materials. Marcin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here. Works. The European Union's policy regarding raw materials, which is called the Raw Materials Initiative, we celebrated its 10th anniversary last year. It started up on the wave of a feeling of concern about rare earths in particular, and strangely enough, rare earths are becoming a hot subject once again. So things go round in circles. 10 years ago, it was recognized that Europe needs to secure a sustainable supply of raw materials for its economy, and the Raw Materials Initiative set out to do just that by ensuring a level playing field in order to have access to raw materials from the outside, fostering sustainable supply from European sources, meaning extraction, and boosting resource efficiency and recycling. The Raw Materials Initiative created the European Innovation Partnership on Raw Materials, which, among other things, introduced a list of critical raw materials, 14 initially. This list was updated and is periodically updated. We now have 27 critical raw materials on the list. And an important thing which I omitted to say was that the Raw Materials Initiative concerns non-energy and non-agricultural raw materials. Non-energy means non-fuel, in fact, because energy energy materials are changing their form slightly. So policy continues and develops, and nowadays we are talking a lot about the circular economy, so moving more towards a situation where waste is a resource. There was some worry initially. I will not go into the details of the circular economy, sorry. There was some worry that this means that we don't want mining anymore, we just want recycling because it's more circular. But this is not the case. One of the 5 priority sectors, as you see here in the Circular Economy Action Plan, is critical raw materials. It is recognized that we need raw materials, and the newest long-term strategy for industry in Europe, called A Clean Planet for All, does recognize that primary raw materials will be needed still in the foreseeable future, so mining is with us to stay. That is the message. Arthur, I'm sorry, searching for the time here, but I don't see it, so sorry if I run out of time, please tell me. The list of critical raw materials that I mentioned, you perhaps do not see the details. The methodology is that economic importance of a given material is plotted on the horizontal axis and security of supply on the vertical axis, and all the raw materials are placed here. Of course, those that are very important and have a shaky security of supply are seen as critical, and rare earths, as you can see, are very high up and there, as well as several others. Of course, where we actually draw the lines is a matter of decision, but it does give a snapshot of the relative importance and safety of supply of the various raw materials. So that's the sort of policy background in a nutshell, and the money for research and innovation leading to implementing these policies comes from successive EU research and innovation framework programs, starting from Framework Program 1 a long time ago, and we are now at Framework Program number 8, called Horizon 2020, and the reason I like to show this graph is, of course, that the funding has been consistently going up since the beginning. The last column on the right is only a proposal so far. It has not yet been decided, and of course we live in uncertain times, so nothing is sure until it is voted and stamped and sealed, but the outlook is fairly optimistic. Now a quick look at the way the system works. On a yearly basis, there is a work program that is published which contains a list of topics that will be funded during that year. Consortia submit proposals. These proposals go into the black box, which is called evaluation, and some of the projects are funded. The projects that we fund are mostly two types of, at least the technological projects. They're called research and innovation actions, which have more of a scientific component, research component. They have lower technology readiness levels, and innovation actions, which are meant to take up innovation closer to the market. These are higher technology readiness levels. And we also fund some policy projects supporting policy called coordination and support actions, which do no research or innovation per se, but are more about gathering best practices, networking, and gathering data, and so on. Now, the black box called evaluation is a peer review process. Projects, proposals are evaluated by expert reviewers from the outside, and hence my traditional call to everyone concerned with research and innovation in raw materials: be an expert evaluator. It is your duty to keep the system going. We need expert evaluators, experts in very many areas related to raw materials, so the field is pretty broad. It is, as I say, your duty. You actually do get paid for it, but that is not the main thing. It is not why people do it. Of course, it is to serve a great cause. A few words about the projects we fund. Since the start of Horizon 2020, we have funded 66 projects, 365 million EU funding, 668 organizations participating, some of them several times, so hence the number of participations is greater at 1,024. And as you see, a majority of the participants in our program are for private for-profit entities, over half. Research organizations and universities make up about 1/3, and then public bodies and other types make up the rest. And you can also see that, of course, naturally, most of the participation comes from Europe, but also from other parts of the world. South Africa is a major, relatively major participant, but also Canada, the US, Australia, and South America. Our projects address the whole value chain of raw materials, so starting with exploration, through extraction, processing. The production part is mostly about the substitution of critical raw materials by other materials. This is the aspect addressed by our program. And then secondary raw materials, closing the loop, coming back to processing, and so on. And then policy support actions in the middle, as you see. And this adds up to the 364 million, and another roughly 175 million coming up this year and next year, which will be the last year of Horizon 2020. Now, all our technological projects are expected to provide solutions through industrially and user-driven multidisciplinary consortia. The industrial and user-driven aspect is very important. Consortia are also asked to address issues such as environmental issues, health and safety issues, and the very important aspects of social acceptance and trust in mining, which is, as we know, a serious problem in all mining and already exploration activities. So no project can get funded without showing a whole spectrum of activities concerning the everything around mining, which is to make it sustainable. But the general focus is on the industrial and user-driven search for industrial solutions, and we scan for future solutions using a technology called, a methodology called the Innovation Radar, which is again based on external experts and is meant to review the potential innovations that will arise out of running projects. So this projects undergo this during their lifetime, and it facilitates, on the one hand, for the project to continue its innovation, putting its innovation on the market, and also for funding, for finding possible sources of future funding. A quick example of one of our projects, which is finishing this year, called UNEXMIN, which has developed an autonomous underwater robot for mapping flooded mines, mapping not only all the tunnels and so on, but mapping in terms of geological and chemical composition. So the aim is to be able to send a robot in and find out if there is something worth mining in old, abandoned, flooded mines. And this has been tested in Kartjala in Finland and in a flooded underground mine in Slovenia. And interestingly, this project, which is now finishing with us, has been able to find follow-up funding from the EIT raw materials funding system, so they will be going on and moving forward. Now, the work program for 2019 is currently, we are evaluating the proposals for that competition, so if you have not submitted a proposal, it is no longer of interest to you. However, there is the call for next year in 2020, the last work program of Horizon 2020, where there will be 89 million euro for raw materials, and you see a list of the topics here. So 7 innovation actions, sustainable processing, recycling of materials from end-of-life products and buildings, advanced sorting systems, sustainable metallurgical processes, mining and substitution of critical raw materials. And I will speed up. Yes, just almost done. So the work program for next year should be published this week. And I would like to tell you that there will be an information day about the topics and how to address them on September 16th and 17th in Brussels. In November, there will be the Raw Materials Week also in Brussels, a good networking opportunity and overview of the situation. And then the next framework program starts in 2021. And one more thing that is not on the slide, immediately after the Info Day on September 18th, there will be a workshop on remote vehicles in mining. The presentations are closed, but it is still possible to present a poster. If somebody should be interested, please send me an email or use the app or whatever. And this was just to give a quick overview of the next framework program, which starts in 2021, and to say that raw materials will still be there in the digital and industry part of the program. Of course, we don't know what the budget will be, but there is a placeholder. And if you should like to know more about our projects, there is a data hub, an interactive map which shows all our projects and beneficiaries on the EASMA website. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marcel. Very interesting. Our next speaker is Marcel Goldenberg of S&P Platts. Marcel is responsible for the European Steel and Global Battery Metals team, is based in London, and the title of his presentation is Pricing a Global Revolution.
Morning. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about, I think, the sustainability we all looked at in the first two presentations, looking at battery metals, in particular electric vehicles. So I've got a few slides there. I might walk around a little bit because I'm a bit of a walker, so don't get distracted. Let's start off with my disclaimer. Basically, if you disagree with what I say or don't think it's right, tough. And with that, just a quick overview. Obviously, we at S&P Global Platts. I think most of you know us. I'm just going to skip through that. We're the leading independent benchmark provider for the commodities world. We look at the spot prices and, of course, on the future side as well. We do it across all the commodities that are out there, really. So just a couple of slides. You can look at that in your own time because I know we're short for time here. That's the one interesting slide that I always like to highlight. If you look at that 10 billion figure, that's the daily value of, underlying value just on our oil side of contracts. Obviously, we've then got ags, petchems, metals, LNG. So there's a lot of kind of money dependent on the prices that we publish. So there's a lot of responsibility on our heads and shoulders as well. Now, let's look at what we're really here for, the sustainability part of all of this. Let's look at battery metals, let's look at electric vehicles and kind of where the future could really go to. And I'm quite excited that I've got Alex afterwards. He's going to dig a little bit deeper into the whole lithium electric vehicle part. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a high-level overview, but of course, over the next 2 days, do feel free to kind of catch up with me and we can have a little bit more in-depth chat about all of what we've got here. So let's look at this, right? Let's look at the graph on your left. So the size of the bubble indicates the population size. So you can see the US or EU are relatively big countries, so they've got a big bubble. But then you can also see, I think there's Argentina, which is not as big a country, so smaller bubble. Then you can see where they are, how high up they are, shows how many % of the population that can legally drive actually own a car. Now look at that and let that sink in a little bit. You've got two very, very big bubbles there at the bottom. If you look at China, if you look at India, you've got about 20, or for India, about 10% of the population that actually own a vehicle. This is not an electric vehicle, that's just a vehicle. Now, we're all looking at, growing middle classes, people getting richer, in particular in China and India. Now, what's going to happen as they become richer, as they can actually afford cars? They're going to move up that kind of chain, right? They're going to move up on that, and they need to purchase more cars. And that's, I think, where the sustainability part comes in. On the one hand, they will be purchasing cars. Obviously, not everybody will be fit to buy an electric vehicle. We go into a little bit more detail of later on why that is at the current moment of time. But there's a lot of potential there for automotive industry, for the metals industry in general, because an automotive needs a lot of metals. So that's quite interesting. On the other side, you can then see the growing middle class, and you can see how that's spiking up as, the work becomes richer. There's more and more people, that actually can buy an electric vehicle. So I think that kind of sets the scene a little bit for, who's going to buy these, where are these demand sectors. And it might also explain why, we're looking at China so much when we look at electric vehicles. They've got a lot of pollution in their country. They're trying to sort this out, and one way to do that, whilst they still probably have another 40%, or in that sense 300% growth in terms of ownership of electric vehicles, that's one of the points why everybody's concerned about that. Now looking at the electric vehicle in particular, the important parts here that we need to look at, the electric vehicle just like that doesn't work. At the moment, it's not competitive with a normal petrol car. What to look after battery metals and what to look after electric vehicle, these are things I need to just say, right? Whilst I've got somewhat of a fetish towards electric vehicles, it just doesn't work by itself. It's just not cost competitive yet. Now, one of you are going to disagree with me on that later. But we need government subsidies to make it work. We need a growing charging network. I mean, we've just heard, I live in London. It's not that easy to charge an electric vehicle. If you don't have your own garage, how are you going to charge it? If you live in a block of flats, how are you going to charge your electric vehicle? One of the things I always come across is like, okay, if I charge my car out on the street, and what overnight somebody unplugs my electric vehicle, I've got to go to work the next day, and I can, can you imagine that phone call? Sorry, boss, I can't come to work. Somebody unplugged my EV. I think that's a new one for the future. So you can see there's a lot of things that we still need to kind of solve and work around, and all of these need to kind of fall into place for us to actually see the electric vehicle kick off to the extent that we want and need them to kick off. Having said all of that, I think it's being tackled. I think we're on a very good progress, and I think governments across Europe, across Asia and across America are doing a good job here to kind of tackle this. But on the whole subsidy part, one of the things that I always like to throw into a room is, how do governments make a lot of money, well, at least in Europe and in America? It's fuel, right? Fuel is taxed. If you now have an electric vehicle and you're actually paying somebody to buy an electric vehicle and you're not getting money back through the fuel, how is the whole thing going to finance itself? Will electricity charges just go up? So then even if we want to charge our phone or use normal electricity, is that going to cost us a lot more? So I think there must be ways to tackle that. And I remember I've asked a politician that question once, like, how are you going to tackle that going forward? He said, oh, by the time that actually becomes important, I'm not going to be in office anymore. It's somebody else's problem. So it was like, okay, at least you're honest to me. So that's always quite interesting. So now the things that we really want to look into a little bit more is the battery, right? The cost of the vehicle. That's really the battery pack. And just to throw some figures out there, in 2010, to produce one kilowatt hour battery, it costs you about $1,000. Now, a Tesla roughly has got 70 kilowatts. So in 2010, just for the battery pack, it would have cost you $70,000 for the battery plus everything around there. Now, you can understand why an electric vehicle still at this point in time isn't there for your working class, right? You will not find an electric vehicle that will just cost you $6,000 to $12,000 because the battery is the expensive part. So it's a luxury item at the moment, and that's something we're trying to tackle. The next slide, we'll look into that a little bit. So quite a complicated slide. Important part is on the left-hand side, you can see that dollar per kilowatt hour figure. And then you can see along the x-axis how it's kind of coming down to drop and what it will mean in the future. Now, the holy grail, as people tend to say, is $100 per kilowatt hour is what we need to get to be really competitive, so we can scale back government subsidies to some extent, and that you can also find cheaper electric vehicle in that maybe 10 to 17,000 US dollar, euro range. Now you can see on that graph and all of these things, a lot of that is being done by our analytics teams. So we've got our own in-house Platts analytics team that sit in New York. They say, if you look at the graph, you probably get to that number at about 2022, 2023. Personally, I think it's going to be a few years later than that, but basically that's when we see this like holy grail being achieved. Now you can also see the gray area in that graph. Now that shows at what point will the EV start to become competitive on a one-to-one basis with the normal petrol car. And you can see, obviously, we've all done analytics, it all depends on the scenario. You can see at the upper end here, with high oil prices, obviously the more expensive your fuel is, the more competitive the EV becomes. And another factor are resale prices for the electric vehicle. And that's, I've dug into this, I think, last week a little bit more. And until then, I must be just like everyone in this room, have been thinking that, an electric vehicle, if it's 4 years old, who's going to buy it? It's like a laptop. Will you buy a 4-year-old laptop when you can buy a brand new one for just 100 or whatever more? You probably won't. So I thought I'd look into that a little bit more. And you know what? Interestingly, the market for resale electric vehicles is actually quite good. And there was a study being done which compared, I think, some of the German cars, like the Volkswagen Golf versus the e-Golf, the Audi e-tron versus the Q, I think 8 it is. And they haven't actually, like if you compare them like a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old car, they haven't actually lost much more value on the EV sale, so they're not as bad in terms of resale as I initially thought. So that was quite a surprise to me at least. So, but yeah, you can see that grey area here shows when and how it's competitive. Again, they show here on an analytics team from 2021 onwards. I think that's in certain scenarios. Again, I think we need to move more into the 2025, 2026, where you can really say, hey, electric vehicle versus a non-petrol car, it doesn't really make a difference. But I think within the next 2 years or so, it'll certainly be, it should start to become your second car of choice. So if you've got two cars, one which is being used a lot more for longer journeys, and you've got a second car, I think that second car should start to become an electric vehicle now. So those are interesting things of how we're moving forward with the whole battery metals and the electric vehicle side of things. So that's quite interesting. Again, very high level overview. Happy to talk to you in more detail about all these things, but obviously the short time we have, that's kind of what we've got here. So let me talk a little bit about what we do on a day-to-day basis, looking at the prices for this. Obviously what goes into an electric vehicle, into the battery, you need lithium, you need cobalt, you need manganese, you need nickel, and so forth. So that's obviously something that we price on a weekly basis at the moment. And the interesting trend I want to talk to you about here is really looking at lithium, because it's the buzzword at the moment, well, next to cobalt, I guess. And I guess with all of what I've just been talking about, you'd think, hey, lithium prices would have had to shoot up over the last, I don't know, 2 years or 3 years. Interestingly, sorry, Alex, they haven't. They've actually dropped by quite a lot. I think about a year ago or a year and a half ago, we were looking at about $18,000 per metric ton for lithium carbonate. That's dropped down to almost just under 11,000 now. So you've really seen that decrease in pricing. I don't have that on the slide. I've got something else on the slide, but I thought this is actually interesting as well, so I'm just going to talk about that now. And you might ask, hey, Marcel, why has that happened? Answer to that is looking at Australia. Australia's got one of the big pools of lithium reserves. So as iron ore prices were low about 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I know it's ironic standing here talking about low iron ore price when we've got delivered China price at about 110 US dollars. So iron ore prices were low, and the iron ore miners thought, hey, what else can we do? What's future-proofing us? How can we make more money? They all thought, hey, lithium, that's cool. We've got lithium here in Australia. Let's start digging for lithium. So they started doing that. And I think there were over 100 new projects in 2016 that were just pushed online. And obviously suddenly, you see more and more lithium coming onto the market. But as we all know, EV pickup rate, or EV pickup, isn't just there yet. So you've got a lot of supply in the market, but the demand isn't just yet there. So you see then obviously demand and supply, you see prices for lithium come down. Having said all of that, the current lithium supply we have wouldn't be enough to kind of, sustain the demand we're expecting to see in the next 3 years. So obviously that's going to adjust itself, and we don't see many more lithium projects at the moment coming online because the prices are so low. There aren't at the moment proper ways to kind of do some risk management about some of the raw materials in the batteries. So banks are stepping back from financing lithium products. So we expect this to kind of shift a little bit in the next couple of years. But I thought it was interesting to mention that despite this, boom and revolution in electric vehicles, that prices for most of the raw materials going into an electric vehicle have really dropped over the last 2 years. Now that's just kind of explaining what we do. Obviously we look at the spot pricing here, so that's usually anything that kind of goes onto a ship within the next 2 to 3 months. And so that's the lithium price we're talking about just now. We also look at the futures and the OTC side. If I have some time at the end, we can briefly talk about hedging, because to the amazement of most people, there actually are some tools available on over the counter for lithium hedging. So that's something that two brokers are doing, but we can maybe talk about that towards the end a little bit. Just what we're doing, as I said, we look at lithium, cobalt, and we've got some import parities. The import parities are really interesting because you've got a two-tier market in lithium. And so you've got a China market, and then because a lot of just the way China's structured, you can't export much material out of China because it's kind of by decree, only certain companies are allowed to move some of the material out of the country. Whilst you then have that seaborne market, you've got that Southern American market, you've got the Australian market. So the two compete with each other. So the import parity is really just so, hey, what if you compared one with the other, but then obviously you need to strip out shipment costs. you need to make sure you adjust it for the right VAT rate, and you need to convert it into the right exchange rate. So those are things that you can see now on the next graph here, and you can see the red line shows you the seaborne market, with the green line being the Chinese market. The Chinese market is always lower, and there is, well, most people in the market don't expect them to really match, despite us now starting to come close here, simply because there's always kind of that material in China that can't leave the country. But also we all know about the North Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, China. They don't really, in that case, like to buy from each other because they think they're such strong competitors, so they don't really want to benefit the other side, rather go into Australia or into Latin America to buy their material from there. So again, that's something I just wanted to briefly share and kind of bring your insight to. Now, I had 1 minute, so I'm just going to very briefly go into this, but not into the most detail. Again, we can talk about it afterwards. Hedging for lithium, it's something you can actually do, and but hedging also on the other side, because I also have a bit of an oil background, and hedging and oil risk management in oil is pretty normal. But moving to the metal side, people suddenly think it's something weird and bizarre. Why should you do risk management? The couple of points I want to just put on this slide were like, you know what you're going to pay, you're receiving, the price is fixed. Shareholders like that. So if you're a listed company, your shareholders like to know, hey, look, this is the risk I'm going to have, this is the money I'm going to pay, this is the money I'm going to receive. Whilst we all say, oh yes, but it might go in my favor, yes, it might also not go in your favor, and that's not going to be good on your share price or on your investors. And you don't need to spend all of that time and money to renegotiating every quarter, every half year, every year. And you can still keep that exposure to the physical market. You don't need to hedge 100%. You can go in and hedge 60%, 70%, but at the basis of that, you can at least eliminate some of that risk. Just on the lithium side, there's two brokers later on. Again, let's talk about that if you want to. FIS and SCB, they offer lithium hedging. So if anybody's interested in that, lithium hedging is already out there. Of course, the LME announced as well they're going to list a lithium contract, but they haven't actually announced when, but they have announced they're going to do it. And then obviously aluminum, cobalt, you can currently already hedge through exchanges like the LME and CME group. And on that, I hope in time I'm going to say thank you and take any questions later on then. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. Our penultimate speaker is Alexander Palkowski. Alexander is COO of Eurolithium. He's also going to talk about the lithium market. I believe the 2020s a pivotal decade for EVs and the global automotive industry.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for making it down to the conference. And Arthur, thank you very much for having us. Much appreciated. So, Eurolithium, we're an exploration and development company based out of Serbia. And we focus, obviously, heavily on the lithium market as one of our primary future products. So we follow this industry quite closely. Now, full disclaimer, we are a mining company, so we're naturally bullish. We have a natural long position on lithium, so please take what I say with a grain of salt. We have an inherent bias, but we do base our strategy in financing and development based on prices of lithium, so we do need to be realistic with ourselves. So the key questions we have for ourselves are, when will plug-in electric vehicles explode? When I say explode, I mean 10 to 20% of sales. And the second question I have is, when will EVs drive the majority of new car sales? When I say majority, say 40 to 60%. Now, to approach these two questions, we break it down to the fundamentals. We're quite pragmatic individuals with a team, and we like to go down to the basics. So let's look at the fundamentals of human behavior, first of all. And then let's look into the fundamentals of buying behavior around automobiles. And when you're at the dealership, what are the most two common things you look at? Probably price is the first one. And then second, if you're looking at, in the EV, you're looking at convenience, like we do with most products. So the critical decision criteria we think buyers will have in the 2020s and even today is price, of course. And we look at more at sticker price as opposed to total cost of ownership, because money today, as we all know, is worth more tomorrow, or worth more today than it is tomorrow. That's economic theory, and it's our natural bias. So we then look at convenience, and we ask ourselves, how far can we go on a single charge? Where do I recharge? And how long will it take me to recharge? So to go back to our original two questions, we break it down a bit further and ask ourselves more questions. When will the retail price of an EV match the price of its ICE or internal combustion engine equivalent? And secondly, when will the convenience of an EV at least match that of their ICE counterpart? So let's take a step back for a second and look at where we were in 2018. 2 million plug-in EVs sold globally, 400,000 of those in Europe. The best-selling EV in Europe was a Nissan Leaf, and the best-selling ICE vehicle was a Volkswagen Golf GTI. The retail price of the Golf was 32,000 euros. The Nissan Leaf was 31,000, so you would think, great, we've hit price parity. Not quite. The Tesla, the best-performing Tesla, was 160,000 euros, the retail. And we saw that on a single gas tank for the Golf GTI, we could go 675 kilometers on the highway, whereas on the Nissan Leaf, we went 250, so a third roughly, and then Tesla only 450. So that tells me, as a car buyer, that I had to pay 5 times the price for a car that can go roughly 2/3 of the range of the Golf. It doesn't make it look very appealing. And I think this is a major contributor as to why we're only seeing 400,000 of 15 million car sales in Europe last year. As well, we should consider how many gas stations there are in Europe, 78,000, whereas in high-speed charging stations, we only have 6,000. It takes about an hour to charge my EV today than it does for my 5-minute ICE Golf Jetta or Golf GTI. It's hard to compare. And unless I have a very strong environmental stint, I'm going to have a hard time making that decision to buy the Nissan Leaf than I am going to be with the Golf. So where are we going? It's the next question. And I think we have to look at competition as a fundamental driver to these two factors, price and convenience, of course. Sales of the internal combustion engines in 2018 were broadly flat, so we saw little growth around the world markets. This is on an average. And we're expecting those to fall in 2019. The sales for EVs grew 70% from 2017, and a similar growth rate is expected next year, or this year, 2019. And as a result, global automotive manufacturers have said, okay, we need to pivot. We need to change our behavior or change the way we're going because obviously market demand fundamentals are shifting. So just to name a few, Audi, Toyota, Honda, VW, Volvo, Porsche, BMW, Jaguar, GM, what else did I miss here? Cadillac, Buick, Nissan, Hyundai, Ford. So you have effectively the entire market going after this space, and that's going to drive significant competition in the EV market going forward. So just by nature of, for numbers' sake, here are on the right-hand side, you'll see the number of EV models we expect to see in 2025. This is the Bloomberg report. So today, we're at about 100 EV models available, whereas in 2025, we expect to see 400, including hybrids. 100 of these 400, so 25%, will be strictly electric, so those 400 include hybrids again. Whereas in 2025, we expect to see about 350 ICEs on the road. So we'll actually see more EVs and hybrids on the road or available for sale than we will ICEs. Now let's look at what is going to drive those competition. That's really going to be in batteries. Today the battery, as my colleague mentioned, batteries are a significant driver to the costs of an EV. In 2015, they were about 50% of EV costs, whereas last year they were around 30%. We expect that to see 20% in 2025, and that's really going to be driven by manufacturing scale and the experience curve. You see here on the chart on the right-hand side, my left-hand side, you see the growth of battery manufacturing output capacity grow significantly over the next 10 years, and that's about by 5 times or 500%. So let's continue on with battery tech for a second and look at where we are today versus where we are tomorrow. So the range and the recharge time will become the new luxury. will say, as opposed to speed, horsepower, and other luxuries we see today, it'll be about range going forward. In 2019, there are 8 EVs with a 320-kilometer range that have made their debut, and the Nissan Leaf, over 1 year, improved its range by 30%. Now, this is largely by a bigger battery pack, but you're starting to see a significant growth in the range of these EVs. Now, Tesla and Porsche have introduced charging technology to allow a 15 to 20-minute recharge for 80%, which is comparable to the 1 hour we saw last year on average. But having said that, it'll take time to roll out this technology and this infrastructure. There are theoretical range limits and recharge limits on these lithium-ion batteries, and this is where lithium-ion has its natural limitations. But good news is that there's a new technology that's on its way out, and that's the lithium-based solid-state batteries. Now, we're seeing that the benefits of these solid-state lithium batteries are faster recharge times, so 10 minutes roughly for 100% or 80%. Range is plus 800 kilometers, which is probably more than any ICE available today, roughly. And then there are mitigated safety hazards, which is a common concern for lithium-ion batteries today. So we're seeing that Toyota, for example, is driving a prototype using solid-state batteries in Japan, and we expect other automotive companies to be running their prototypes in the early 2020s. Now, the reason why this is so important, as you can imply, is that once you surpass these convenience issues, you really will see EVs drive the market, in our opinion. So we expect solid-state batteries to, it's been said to 2025, but we're a bit more conservative, and we think it'll be the later part of the 2020s. Another factor, as we talked about, was the number of charging stations versus the refill stations in Europe. If range is less than 500 kilometers, chances are you're thinking about that as a potential source of anxiety. It's a difficult challenge to roll out this infrastructure, especially when adoption rates are low. That means that utilization rates are low, and so financing becomes much harder because the payback period is much longer. When you have EV penetration of, say, 30 or 40%, you'll see the utilization rates of the charging infrastructure improve dramatically. But at this point today, we're not quite there just due to the low penetration of EVs. Now, we see different automotive companies taking different strategies as to how to roll out their infrastructure. We look at Porsche and Tesla building out their own infrastructure, and as you know probably today, Tesla dominates the space. They have a range of 400 supercharged network throughout Europe. You can go pretty much northwest, east, south with this range. It's quite incredible. I recently did a road trip to test this out personally. And Jaguar and Nissan are going with the open source strategy, so leveraging third-party infrastructure developers to deploy a network. And then you're seeing partnerships, Ford, BMW, Daimler coming together to create their own consortium to produce their own network. Again, this will take time to build. As I mentioned, Tesla is far ahead of the game here, and it'll take some time for other companies to catch up. And I think one key note here around EVs is that this is a new technology. I mean, we're not talking about liters anymore. We're talking about kilowatts and kilowatt hours. We're not talking about speed. We're talking about range. If you've driven an EV, a Jaguar or a Tesla, it's advanced. And it'll take time for all of us to understand where to find charging stations. Do I use the app, for example, as to where to find the next, call it 80% charge? What is kilowatts? What are kilowatt hours? These are, they're not complex terms, but it takes time for the masses to get ourselves used to it. Now, when we do our analysis, we think about the government having a significant role, and this has been touched on already, but we try to remove that bias because governments are naturally unstable or unpredictable. Donald Trump's a good example of that, of course. EU's a bit better, and so is China, but nonetheless, we try to remove subsidies away from our analysis because of, call it, their uncertainty. But they can play a significant role if they want to get involved, which we think they do. Again, we try to remove that from our analysis, however. They can support the industry through high-speed charging infrastructure and EV price reduction subsidies, education and marketing programs, or emission regulations, as you see in the EU. You also see governments getting involved through technology grants. So I mentioned Toyota as a major player in the solid-state battery space. Let's mention here that the Japanese government has a 90 million euro program to support this R&D in the country of Japan. And let's see the role that government is having today in some countries. In Norway, you see 34% of new car sales being EVs, and we're expecting this to pass 50% in 2019. China, the major market, and as you saw at my colleague's chart here, 4.4% in 2018, far above the national global average, and expected to reach 6.7% in 2019. The US, 2% in 2018, forecast to grow materially in 2019, but post-2020 is hard to say. Is it Donald Trump or is it a Democrat? And that will have significant implications on clean technology and call it sustainability broadly in the US. Having said all of this, we do expect Europe to have an increasing role in the deployment of EVs. This is driven predominantly by, call it, the climate-conscious millennials. You saw in the EU elections this year, the Greens increased the number of seats by 30%, and that was predominantly driven by youth voters in Germany with particular concern around climate. And I guess as a millennial, I can say that this is going to be the average, and this is going to be the trend going forward. So, given all the above, thank you, and all this in consideration, we go back to our original questions. When will plug-in EVs explode? And that's 10 to 20%. And our forecast is around 23 to 2025. And lastly, when will EVs drive the majority of new car sales? And again, I'll put a 40 to 60% range, or a slim majority. And we think in the later half of the decade, around 2028 to 2030. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. Absolutely fascinating. And Marcel also, I think we could happily keep a Q&A going on that topic until lunchtime, but hopefully we'll have a chance for some questions once I finish my presentation. So I'll keep mine as short as I can to try and ensure that can happen. So I'm going to zoom right back out to the macro European picture, I'm afraid. I'm going to talk about mining, but talk about sustainable mining, and in particular socio-economic development, a factor that is so important in the European context. On this slide you'll see a term, the mine we want to see. That's an ERM term. It's our attempt to create a discussion which better defines what sustainable mining is. And the important thing in that sentence is that the we is not ERM, it's not me, it's not the people in this room, it's anybody and everybody. And we actually developed the term after one of our clients said that they aspire to build mines that people actually want to see in their adjacent to their communities, and the mine we want to see scanned better than people we want to see, so that's how it came about. As a sustainability consultancy, you can imagine we spend a lot of time talking about what sustainable mining is and what it means, and it means so many different things to different people. But just for the record, to us, we adopt the conventional definition of sustainability as the commitment to supporting socio-economic development of current generations and the present without compromising the need for future generations. So this is how we categorize the mine we want to see, and just to emphasize social performance is the central pillar here, and social performance is what is so important to our mines in Europe, which I'll come to later. And whilst mining has such a bad press in so many quarters, and rightly so sometimes, there are mines which truly integrate economic benefits, manage the environment around them responsibly, develop local supply chains and leave a positive legacy, and those really are the mines that we want to see, albeit no mine would claim to do everything perfectly, I don't think. Just, I think this graphic works at this scale. This is a grid published by a Japanese professor whose name I have tried to pronounce, but I make such a mess of it, I won't bother. There's actually 12 dots on this grid, and if you look closely, you can probably only see 3 or 4 at any one time. And I think this demonstrates how important it is as we focus on very large projects to think maybe about each of those dots being one of the factors that we need to think about when developing and operating a successful mine. And if you focus, and naturally you will, on 3 or 4 of the most important things to you, it's easy to forget about the other ones and lose sight of them. And our jobs is to make sure that we make sure that the right choices are made with regard to all of these factors and plenty more. A further bit of scene setting. This is some research that ERM undertook initially about 10 years ago, and we updated it 2 or 3 years ago. It was into very large mining and extractives projects based on publicly available information. I think we got 65 of capital expenditure of $1 billion or so. And we looked into how many were delayed. And you can see that 57% were delayed or abandoned. That's incredible. That means that major extractive projects are more likely to be delayed or abandoned than they are to go ahead on time. We looked into the reasons, and they fell into the categories on this slide. The numbers don't add up to 100% because many projects cited more than one reason. But when you look at non-technical causes, stakeholder opposition was somewhere between 38% and 52% as the reason for delay. Permitting issues, 38 to 20%. Environmental concerns, 17 to 39%, depending on when you did the research. That's amazing. That is a huge factor in additional cost and delays. Imagine how that converts into billions of dollars lost in net present value. I couldn't even begin to work it out. So these are the reasons why social performance is the central pillar of the mine we want to see, and particularly in a European context. And a key element of social performance is local benefits. And that's a principle that we call resource localism. Resource localism is the justifiable expectation of communities affected by a mine construction, operation and closure that they will benefit from the operation of that mine, and that the mine will contribute towards the social and economic progress of that area for generations. And there's a growing realization amongst our clients that the successful implementation of resource localism, relies on more than just local employment. I think we're all understanding the importance of local employment, and in fact our friends at Dundee Precious Metals, I heard them recount the wonderful fact that 1 or 2 of their mines in Bulgaria have enabled local people to return to the area from other European countries because of the employment benefits that they've generated, which is a fantastic story. But the point is, a successful approach to resource localism requires a holistic approach to addressing the social and environmental and economic functionality of a region. My background is in economic development. Prior to joining ERM, we talked about the leaky bucket analogy. The leaky bucket analogy is an attempt to describe how you need to retain the benefits of investment in a local economy. So the bucket is the local economy, the water is the investment. Inevitably that water will leak out. Our challenge is to keep the water in the bucket as long as possible and recirculate it as much as we can. keep the money swirling around. In practice, that's not easy, and one of my clients recently described, he said, "This isn't rocket science, is it?" And I said, "It's not rocket science, but it's bloody difficult to do properly. You need to work so hard with your supply chain. You need to build capacity in the local economy. You need to change the mindsets of your designers and project managers who are so focused on cost, safety and program. And you need to think about economic diversification at the outset, and more on these in the coming slides. Going beyond local employment, this is from outside the mining sector. This is a graphic prepared by a major renewable energy developer to demonstrate that they had thought about where the principal high-value constituents of their project were going to come from, and they'd mapped them, and they worked with supply chains and their designers to ensure that those materials could be manufactured as close as possible to where the project sat, and of course presented it in a very graphical way which is readily consumable by stakeholders. A further example as they dive down deeper into the components. I've accidentally changed the order of my slides, but never mind. Many of our clients are thinking beyond this again. Some of them are now talking about economic diversification. And this is a process whereby you take the principles of post-closure, where you look to diversify the economy once the mine has closed, so that the people in the area can achieve gainful employment. But you start thinking about that years before closure. You start thinking about it almost and ideally at the outset of the mine, and you start mapping the local economy and seeking opportunities to use the mining companies' influence, their land, and a little bit of their money to pump prime alternative businesses and economic opportunities. This is arguably sustainable mining. This is about using mining activity to generate a sustainable economy, so that eventually when the mine does close, because of course they inevitably do, the mine is removed as the centerpiece of the local economy, but the economy just powers on. And a few examples of where things have come close to varying degrees. This is a project I worked on for many years in the UK. I worked on this project on and off for 10 years and thoroughly enjoyed every second. It tells the story of how a metals processing site was successfully converted into a new development that met the social and economic needs of the surrounding area and town. But the issue with this one was that that planning only commenced 2 years before the metals processing facility closed. So we were always on the back foot in terms of addressing the issues of the area. It ended up costing a heck of a lot of money, a lot of which luckily was European aid, and it was many times more difficult than it would have been if it had planned at the outset. Another UK example, BP, major oil company, pretty much pulled out of oil refining and chemicals in the UK, all in one go. But they did manage to create a successful legacy on many of their sites, including a investment getting on for $500 million in a new major university on a significant part of their land holding, as well as business and housing opportunities. Again, plenty of awards attached to this, and we had the pleasure of walking around the sites with BP and a major international mining company only 2 months ago, and what an uplifting place to be, and funding has been drawn from plenty of other sources that I think BP never even foresaw at the time. But the point is, again, they started this when they closed. They had enough land to be doing this 10, 20 years before they closed, and in the process they would have also created more value for the core land that the refinery sat Two more slides. This is another a UK example where the diversification of the local area formed a key part of the initial planning of the mine and actually formed a focus for stakeholder consultation, generating significant stakeholder support because this had a life of mine of only 8 years. So it was very much driven by a strong vision for what happens once the mine closes. Very unusually, it received its permit with no public inquiry, and the mine is already closed 8 years after opening, and the repurposing has commenced. So concluding remarks, the mine we want to see in a socio-economic sense responds to communities' expectation, understandably, that they should benefit from resource development. It recognises that money is like water, it finds the easiest path, and too often that path is outside of the local area. A rapidly emerging element is the establishment as routine of economic diversification strategies from the outset of a mine, not once closure hose into view. Part of that is forcing designers to think differently and to think local and sustainable. And above all, of course, work in partnership with local agencies, suppliers, politicians and stakeholders. You cannot build a sustainable mine without them. Thank you. Have we got Arthur? No? You say no? Can I ask one? Guys, so you talked a lot about Tesla, you talked a lot about the competition, you talked about subsidies. So first question is, has the rest of the industry caught up with Tesla already? Microphones are there, just pick it up, they'll switch it on.
Is it on? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that he forced it on me. Have they caught up with Tesla? I think Tesla is an interesting story. And whenever I'm German, right? And whenever I go see the German automotive companies, they say, we are happy Tesla is around because they are basically bearing the cost of what we need to do. They spent so much money on marketing. They basically do what we kind of haven't done and what we didn't manage to do because they make it interesting. They've kind of created this Apple product, and then, you've got your LGs, your Samsung, they've got them benefiting on the back of that. And have they caught up with them? Yes and no. I mean, I looked at the the e-tron the other day, that's the Audi SUV, and they've done things with their mirrors where, you've only got a camera as the rear view mirror on the side, and the actual image is in the inside on a screen. So you've got like another TV inside the car where you watch it. So I think obviously the technology and the stuff they have available at Audi, BMW, Ford is superior to what Tesla have, but Tesla just still manage to market the product a bit better, which is a little bit like Apple. But I don't know how you would.
Yeah, I'd agree with much of what you said. I think to be specific, in 2020, the conglomerate, the consortium that Porsche, Ford, VW, Audi have come together on, it's called INE. They expect to have as many superchargers in Europe as Tesla does, so that's next year. Mm-hmm. So I think Tesla's ahead today, but I know they have a huge market coming after them, or huge players coming after them, so I don't expect it to take very long.
And straight yes or no, will Tesla be in business in 12 months' time?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think just the one thing to what you said on the charging side, right? That's another very interesting thing to consider. There's 3 different charging mechanisms out there, right? So it's just things we can see where we really need to kind of see some governments to step in. Like, as you can see with the mobile phones, there is, your one charger which works for everything but Apple, and there's an Apple charger. So, it's these things that we need to overcome because it just makes it difficult for everybody. That, hey, how can it be that if I've got one car, I can't charge over here? If we can use every charging mechanism around, it again makes it a lot easier for everybody. So.
Yeah, this is the learning curve I referenced, the different charging levels, speeds, types, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you. So coffee time now, I believe. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you, everybody. Coffee's in the foyer. Thank you.